try to change anyone. You marry them for a reason. Whatever faults, whatever things that they may have, you think, okay, well, I'll change that, or I'll, yeah. No, accommodate. If you're not flexible, if you can't communicate, if you can't, live together, there's a problem. So if you try to change someone, then you start getting irritated because they won't change. They get irritated, and then before you know it, you have disagreements. You have things that can erupt. No, just you marry somebody for a reason. You accept everything that's there. I'm not perfect. She's not perfect. It doesn't matter. You accept, and there's times you butt heads, but it's a very brief butting of heads, and it goes on. But if you try to change someone, then you get discouraged. Your expectations aren't met. You become unhappy, and things begin to unravel. And I think that to me is a big key. Obviously, people tell you, communications is a big deal. But yeah, you can have communications, but if you still try to change somebody, you have a problem. That to me is the key: is don't change anyone.
Okay, so don't try to change anyone.
Yeah, you can adopt, you can adapt. You're flexible. You go with the flow. What's going on there? If you know there's something there that really, pisses you off, torques you off in one direction, well, you know what the hot buttons are. Don't push them. You know what things do work. Push those buttons. There's a lot to life. You can do anything you want. Just push the right buttons.
So these days, there's a lot of different ways uh, in the dating world, especially. We have a lot of apps. How did you guys do it 50 years ago?
Well, I met my wife 3 years before we got married. It was on my birthday, and we were at a football game at a high school B team game. My best friend, one of my best friends at that time, said, "Hey, my little brother's playing. You want to go over tonight?" So I went over there. His cousin was there with his mom, and I kind of kept glancing down. Nice, good-looking blonde, and I kept glancing down. She glanced at me, and about a week later, I got her phone number, and I'd give her a call, and then another call, and things kind of okay. Fine, let's get together, and so we started dating, and it was a bit of a drive every time I wanted to go out to where they lived, but it was one of those things. My mom kept bugging me about putting too many miles on the car, but you're young and impressionable and starting to fall in love, so you do it anyway. And so we eventually, like I say, almost 3 years, but about 6 months before we got married, I proposed. And so we spent 6 months getting ready for the wedding. And ironically, it wasn't that many years ago. I'm going to say about 8 years ago, we did our eighth honeymoon, and we started all over again where we got married at the very beginning in Violet, Texas, and we did the honeymoon trail. We spent the night there. The first place we ever spent was in Rockport, Texas, and then we went to Hemisphere in San Antonio and spent a week. So we basically repeated our honeymoon from 50 some years earlier, or at that time it's 40 some years earlier. But we were had just seen a movie called The Way with Martin Sheen about walking the Camino de Santiago in Spain. And we talked about it and talked about it. And she says, I'm never going to spend a night in a hospital. I said, that's out. Just not going to happen. I said, but if you can guarantee me a private room and a private bath every night, I'll consider it. So for the next year, we walked all the time. We got our shoes, we got our backpacks, and I got on a military Space A flight, and we flew to Spain, and then we took a train up to Pamplona, took a bus the next morning up to southwestern France, a place called Saint Jean Pied de Port, and we walked over the Pyrenees Mountains, and in 30 days we walked 500 miles. The two of us, we celebrated our
Wow,
70th birthdays walking together.
that sounds like a nice trip.
So yeah, we've done a lot of stuff together. I've been to 61 countries. I've gotten her to 20, 25, I think, 25 or 26.
61 countries. Um,
She didn't want to go to Bosnia and
what? Wait,
Vietnam and places like
I,
that.
what's your? I don't know if I should ask favorite country because I've traveled a lot as well. I don't know if I have a favorite country. If you were to go back, what country would you go back? I guess.
Well, it depends on the purpose. If I'm just going on vacation, Tahiti, bar none. I mean, I love it. I fell in love with that place twice, the two times I was down there. I went down there for a few days with the Navy. Then the following summer, I took my wife down there for 2 weeks. I like. I lived in Germany for a couple of years at the end of the '90s. I love Czech Republic. I think that Prague is one of the most beautiful cities over there. Yet Ljubljana, Slovenia, is a wonderful small capital. It's got a lot going for it. And so it depends on what you're doing. I mean, if I like a country, I like a lot of things to do. Germany certainly has that. I love Spain. We just spent, I think, 42 days in Spain when we walked the Camino. So the options are, if I have it, I love hot, flat, and humid. That to me is ideal place to live. Where can I get that? Not many places. South Texas is where I'm living now, and it's close. But with regard to travel, I want to the food, the customs, the cultures, the people, the sites, all those things add up. And I'm be hard pressed to say, you know, Spain has it over, Italy has it over. Pick another country. It doesn't matter which one it is. I like the Far East. I've been over there. I try to pick up a little bit of the languages as I'm going. So if I'm in, say Korea, and I know how to say, thank you and goodbye, 감사합니다. 안녕히 계세요. I can say thank you and goodbye in those language. Or if I'm in Czech Republic, I can say dva piva, people, 2 beers, please. And so I try to learn the language of a turista, so that I can fit in a little bit better. My Czech is a little bit better than my Korean. My German's far better than my Spanish, but my Spanish is pretty decent. So anyway, I try to learn those individual language because I think it makes you feel more part of the culture. We were down in Mexico, I think, for our 25th wedding anniversary, and we had a half a day to kill. So we just rented a taxi cab, and I spent the best Spanish I could do driving around asking questions, and the driver would correct me. It's like muchas personas, much persons. He said, no, 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 muy gente. Okay, I understand. So I love the foreign languages. I love the the cultural aspects of them, and so that to me is a big deal in my life.
What country has the best food?
Well, I love Italian food. That to me, if I had to pick one, I would pick that. It's interesting. I do not like Mexican food. I don't like cornmeal and I don't like beans. My wife loves Mexican. In fact, everybody else in the family loves Mexican food. I love Spanish food. We were in Spain and my wife refused to eat Spanish. Well, I think she had some tapas, but I was just in heaven in Spain eating all the time. My wife, had to pick and choose what she wanted. So you'd think Mexican and Spanish would be close, but they're not. But I love pasta. I love bread. I love red wine. Those are the things. I didn't think I would enjoy German food, but I got there and maybe one or two that I didn't like. I picked out in Germany. I just had a really good time eating food in Germany. But again, it's what is the experience that you're having? Who is it with? How is the food introduced to you? I remember the first time I had um, snails in Hong Kong. Everybody else at the table had one. Okay, let me taste one. Okay, well, it's not too bad. But then I had boiled silkworm larvae in Seoul, Korea, and I didn't like that at all. It was like eating boiled cockroaches. It didn't taste good. So, I don't mind trying things, but I do have a sensitive palate.
Have you ever tried the I don't remember the name for this, the egg they have in you know the,
The fermented egg, duck egg,
yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. In the Philippines, they had a lot of those, and if you got drunk enough, people would usually try them. But to answer your question directly, no, I never did. But I saw quite a few people eating them and then throwing them up later.
Yeah, I've actually tried one a long time ago and it wasn't, I don't think I'll ever do it again. I do agree with you with the Italian food. It's amazing. I was just there this last September and the food was amazing. Also Germany. I'm still trying to find the sausage they had over there. It's called Leberkas. It's a sandwich. They put like a sausage in between two buns and then they put some sauce on it. The best sandwich I've ever had.
Well, there's
But
two
I can't
foods
find it in US.
there was two foods I got over there. One I got in the Far East and in Germany and Italy. It's called salmon spaghetti. You have basically a salmon sauce with pasta and flaked salmon in there, and you get it all over the place. I make it here at the house, but I can't find anybody else that makes it anywhere. Another one was a cream of garlic soup that I loved. I get in Austria on my return home from Italy, and I'd stop at the same place every single time. It was just to die for. It was just an amazing meal. Now I could get garlic soup all over Spain, but it wasn't cream of garlic. But with regard to the pastas and stuff like that, I'm not sure I ever found a pasta I didn't like. So it's I think it's an ideal meal. As a health and wellness person, it's not something I can handle all the time. So depending on what kind of lifestyle I'm living at the time, sometimes I want to go a little bit more fasting. I've already done an 80-hour fast this month. I do a 72-hour fast every month. Sometimes it ends up at 100, 150 hours, sometimes 200 hours. It sort of depends what's going on. Lent is coming up later on this month, and I think last time I started Lent with about a 220-hour fast, and I ended it with about a 150-hour fast. But I fast all the time. To me, that's one of the best things you can do for your health. And so, as a fast goes, I want to break it somehow. Sometimes I want to break it with a big spaghetti meal. Other times I want to break it with something else. So, I'm still learning what is the most healthiest way or the best way to break a fast where I can still continue. There's two terms that are probably applicable. When you're in a fast for 17 hours, your body begins to shift and you incrementally go into a phase called autophagy. And that's where the trash trucks show up, the recyclers show up, and they start touring all of the cells in your body. They're taking the stuff that the cells are dumping out. So you're basically cleaning your cells, and it maximizes
Mm.
itself at 72 hours. Well, about 72 hours, your body also makes another decision that it says if something's not working 100%, get rid of it. And so now you have DNA that's partial. You have other things that and so your body kind of cleanses itself on top of all this recycling and cleaning that's going on at the cellular level. But you need that to clean things out. But you also need the growth part of that's called mTOR. That's the mammalian target of rapamycin, and that's the part where your body grows. And that's when you eat. But if you eat all the time and don't fast, there's nothing there to clean up. Your body has a cleanup mechanism.
Right, right,
So anyway,
right.
too much of a good thing is too much of a good thing.
That's true. Do you guys have any trips coming up
I have three
anytime
planned
soon?
this year: one to a military reunion in New Orleans, one to visit my granddaughter in Virginia for her dance recital, last one of the year. She's like a senior in high school, just got her driver's license. And then the last one we have is a family reunion in Central Florida. Those are three I know for
Mm.
sure. Maybe a boat cruise. We're not sure about that one yet.
You've been in the military for a while. You traveled a lot. Have you ever seen a UFO?
I want to say yes, I have. Um,
Oh, okay.
it wasn't in the military. It was in as a kid. I'm laying in a small pool in the backyard, and I see these two little things fly by, and I'm saying to myself, "Did I really see what I saw?" But to me, to this day, I'll swear that I saw a UFO. Um, did I? Did I not? No. Did I see close
What did it look
encounter?
like?
What?
What
Just
did it look like?
two little. They were round spheres, but they had kind of a little dish-like wrap around the outside that actually looked like an old-fashioned spaceship you used to see back in the 50s. But they were going at a pretty good clip, and they were just rolling around each other. And, and like I said, I only saw them for about 3 or 4 seconds because I happened to be laying back, looking at the sky, just enjoying myself. And then all of a sudden, these things come by. I mean, they were low enough for me to see and make out what they were. Could they have been 1,000 feet and been really big? I don't think so. I think they had to be down, a couple 300 feet because what I could see now. Again, am I dreaming? I don't think so, but it certainly woke me up. And I looked, and after I snapped, I looked at them and I saw them go away. And ironically, I've never mentioned that to anybody. You're the first person that's ever asked me that question.
Oh, wow. Being in the military for that long, did you guys had any conversation about like UFO or any kind of stuff like that back in the day?
No, I got an invitation to Vietnam. So the first, 4.5 years of my life, we were flying in and out of Vietnam, and in support of that, my first deployment over there, we're spending 10 days in the Philippines, 10 days in Vietnam, 10 days in Thailand, and we just rotated month after month after month, and flew our missions out over the South China Sea or the Indian Ocean. So UFOs were never a conversation. Then you went from a wartime Navy to a peacetime Navy where paperwork became the number one thing. And so you started concentrating on other things. Then you ended up really into the Cold War. And so we were concentrated at that point in time on Russian submarines. And so that became the focus until the Berlin Wall fell. And then all of a sudden, things started to shift again. And then about the time they realized that they had cut back the military too much, I had an opportunity to go back on active duty. I spent 4.5 on active, 20 in the reserves, and I went back on active duty for 6 years. So I spent 2 years in
Okay.
New York City, 2 years in the Bay Area, California, and 2 years in Stuttgart, Germany, and retired out of there.
So you're trained to be a flight officer,
Yes,
and
I
so
spent
when you saw this thing, what did you think to yourself? Like, do you think we have anything in the U.S. military or any other country, anything like that?
Well, if you think back to the SR-71, it was designed with a slide rule, back way long time ago before computers. It was flying forever. The U-2 we knew about, but the SR-71 we didn't know about. And I think that there's probably several other, I'm going to use the term liberally, spy planes that have been flying, and whether they were successful enough to be mission ready and available. But I think that yes, we do have some very high technology. I think that we use it all the time. I think if you're near Area 51, you might even have a chance to take a picture of one if it was flying by, but they usually try to do that at night, where it's a low opportunity for discovery. But yeah, I am sure when they retired the SR-71s, everybody's asking, well, what replaced it? And usually something that replaced it has to replace it with enough time to say, yeah, this is a viable vehicle that it can do the mission and whatever. So I think that yes, we have. Have I seen them? No. You know, I'm sure that let's say that I'm a mechanic and I'm needed to work on a landing gear or something that because I'm out in the middle of nowhere, maybe Naha, Okinawa, or someplace like that. And I'm sure that if I have to work on something, I'm sworn to secrecy and sign some documents that I'm not allowed to talk about it. I can imagine that being a very viable scenario when these things are temporarily in need of maintenance at a faraway place. They obviously fly in the crew to do everything, but sometimes they found something they don't want to spend another 2 days trying to get somebody else out there, and they'll commandeer somebody with the right skills. So, but yeah, I honestly believe we have at least two generations beyond the SR-71.
Okay. Um, I don't know if you've seen this documentary the government put out with the Tic Tac story, and those. Have you seen those
No,
videos?
no, I have not.
Okay, I'll send you
I
a link.
watch
It's
very
actually
very little
amazing.
TV.
Yeah, same here. One of my buddies actually sent me a video. Apparently, the U.S. Navy has released, oh, it got leaked, but they actually confirmed it that these videos are real,
Hmm.
and they took it. Um, it's somewhere, I think, out of the coast of San Diego. Um, they were doing some test runs with some pilots, and then they actually have a recording of this tic tac looking thing just doing weird stuff. It wasn't flying like a regular flight. It's
Yeah,
just there was no proportions. There was no. It, you got to see the video. I'll send you a link.
I would appreciate it. With the thousands of stars that are out there, with as much history as we've had. Is there any reason to believe that there aren't some Klingon or some other, Vulcan entities out there that have capabilities far in excess of us? And if they do, I'm sure they have the same kind of general don't go back and change time, don't change history because things evolve a certain way. And if they've learned the same lessons that we have over time, yeah, they're here to observe, but I don't think they're here to interact. Will they pick people up and observe them, up close and personal? I don't see why not. I maybe I'm a little free with my thoughts on that matter, but I can understand that. Yeah, there's probably other beings out there, and I think they're there, but I think they're there to observe and not to conquer, not to interact with our daily routines. And if we happen to pick them up, um, we have a paranoid government who doesn't want to tell anybody anything, so they're going to keep it secret. We just learned that with the balloon. We've had how many balloons? Of course, they said they haven't seen the first three, but that last one they knew it was coming days before coming because it was going over Canada and they were tracking it, but they didn't tell us about it. So yeah, I can understand. There's fear. There's a lot of other issues out there that we'll handle it down the road. We'll round down the road turns into down the minute, and anyway.
Yeah, I think we need to do a different video on this subject.
Yeah.
um, how did your training as a flight officer prepare you for the challenges of a military career and a leadership role?
Okay, excellent question. Great question. I started out as a navigator. Uh, I was trained as a navigator. We had a lot of different things back then. There was no computers in our aircraft for navigation. We had sensors, stars. those kinds of things that we could use. So most of my first, I'm going to say, year flying on active duty in a P-3 Orion anti-submarine warfare aircraft was as a navigator. The next step up, and in navigation, you have two different kinds of navigation. You have what's called en route navigation. I'm going to go from point A to point B. In fact, my very first flight in a P-3, when my squadron got back to Hawaii in January of '71, everybody was heading back to the States to go to, for Christmas.
Yep. So for those of us who doesn't understand, what's a navigator
Okay.
is like in a. So are you like so are you in the back seat navigating? Is it like
Well,
a
in my
pilot in the
aircraft, there's
front?
there's 13 people. Three pilots, two flight engineers are up in the front. You have a radio operator, then you have a radar operator, a navigator sitting literally in the middle of the plane, right across the wings. Then the tactical coordinator, some acoustic operators, and ordnancemen. And so, from the navigation
So,
perspective, I am tracking the course of the aircraft. Wherever it goes, I have a plot on paper showing where we were. The course, the speed, the altitude, all those kinds of.
so there's no GPS tracking back in the day. You're literally looking at the stars, saying where we are.
Stars or other navigational aids. You had other different kinds of things there you could use to plot your fix. But no, there was no
That is
GPS. Now,
amazing.
as I was evolving, satellite navigation came in, inertial navigation came in. I did one trip from uh, Hawaii to Tahiti, and I think we were 8 feet, 10 feet off on our location. I was like 0.001 of wherever we were at on the runway when we checked it, and that was with an inertial navigation system. Everything was internal. We didn't look at anything outside the aircraft. But but the navigator's position is you track everything. Now, if you're flying overland, let's say you're going from San Diego to Miami, the pilots do all the navigation because they have all of the electronic needs they have. But if they leave Los Angeles and fly to Hawaii, Honolulu, there's nothing out there for them to track. But the inertial navigations are so good nowadays, and they have use like triple redundancy backup, so you can start flying in that direction and find where you're going. Back in the 30s, 40s, when you're leaving San Diego and you're flying to Hawaii, you aim for about 200 miles south of Hawaii so that when you get out there, if you have an error, you're turning north, you're not worried about the southern error. So eventually you can figure out where you were. When we're flying,
Why aren't you worried about the southern air?
because you're flying far enough south that if you make a southern error, you're just a little bit further south than where you were. But if you aim straight at Hawaii and you get there and you can't see anything, are you north of Hawaii or are you south of Hawaii? If you turn north and you're north of Hawaii, now Alaska is your next destination if you make it. So you want to air such that if you're airing, you want to be south of Hawaii. If you're north of that place, you're still okay. So it's like it's a safety measure, and that's what they used to use in the old Pan Am Clippers and things. That they would actually aim for a point further south, so when they got there, they didn't see anything. They would head north, and it'd be fine. Otherwise, you aim for something and you don't know where you're at, you can make an error and never recover. Make sense?
Make total sense. I mean, I wouldn't understand because I can't go to grocery store without my GPS. You're flying over country.
But I spent a year and a half as a navigator, and then I switched over to a tactical coordinator. Then I switched over to a mission commander, that I was in charge of the entire mission. And when you start having those kinds of responsibilities for the flight crew, telling them where to go, tell the pilots where to go, plan the mission, that becomes part of your leadership development, your authority development, your ability to have credibility when you give directions that they're going to be followed out. And if you need to correct somebody, you do it in a positive manner. I mean, a flight crew operates totally different than a normal military entity with enlisted and officers. We're not necessarily on a first name basis, but we're certainly a lot closer than I would be in a normal squadron environment or in some other environment in the military. So it depends on what is that cohesiveness of that unit and how well do they work together. I think when you start having command and control over that small unit, that develops your leadership skills. My first love was chemistry. I never had a chance to practice it because I got an invitation to Vietnam. But nowadays I use it a lot. But I have 5 different degrees, academic degrees in different areas, because at that time in my life I needed that particular specific knowledge. So my navigation knowledge advanced me to my tactical coordination knowledge, advanced me to my mission commander knowledge. My skills in reliability engineering, quality engineering, logistics engineering advanced me into different other aspects of my life, and I try to use some of that academic stuff to fill in the gaps and make me better.
Can you discuss the role of technology and innovation in the military and how it has evolved, excuse me, over the time?
Well, I can tell you how it evolved in our particular case. When I joined, when I joined my squadron, the way we found Soviet submarines was to stick a sonobuoy in the water. A sonobuoy has a long hydrophone that listens just for sound. The top of it's floating on the water and broadcasts a signal back to the aircraft. At that point in time, all you heard was sound. You had no idea where in the world it came from. So you're sitting there and you're monitoring a pattern of buoys, and the buoys may be 30, 40 miles apart. And so you're flying at 30,000 feet and you're just listening. And maybe this buoy over here has a contact on something. Okay, well, maybe this other one over here has one too. And so you kind of triangulate, where is that submarine? Well, in summer of 72, they came out with a brand new buoy, new technology. They could actually identify where the sound was coming from in a very narrow range, so that if I looked at a particular sound, I could, okay, that sound is due north. If I want to look at another sound, I could actually manipulate, okay, that's not coming from the same target, it's coming from down. So it's now if I honed in on the target, I know I go that direction, I'm going to find him. So that was a major improvement in technology. When we start doing the improvement in our navigation capability. If I drop a buoy from 30,000 feet, it takes 5 minutes to hit the ground. I have wind that's blowing that sonic buoy as it comes down. It gets in the water. The currents, drifted along. By the time I get down to 500 feet to mark on top of it, it might be 5 miles, 10 miles away from where we originally dropped it. Is that submarine still in the same location? There are a lot of things that drift. So when you get with the newer navigational systems and you mark on top of that buoy, now you know exactly where that buoy is within 2 decimal points. So you know exactly where that submarine is within 2 decimal points, not within 2 miles, not within 4 miles. And so as you get the technology that improves, the accuracy and the clarity of your solution becomes much better continually. And the same thing with weapons. You drop something, okay, it may or may not hit where you want. Well, now they got the smart bombs. They just slap this thing on the front of a bomb, and it kind of guides it right down into the window or your, whatever automobile you want it to hit. And so, yeah, the technology from the military perspective has improved in communications, in sensors, in uh, recording devices, in all sort, any aspect of an aviator's dream that they want. Improvements have been made. Radar. You have aircraft now that can't be seen. So that technology abounds, and of course it's stolen and it's used against you, and so you have to have a little bit better technology to pick up what you couldn't pick up before. So it's an ever expanding spiral of getting better and better and better, and who has the most
Right.
money to spend on it.
So they're still they're still dropping buoys today. Why can't the satellites track submarines?
Well, that's an excellent question. I've asked myself that myself. How do you find a target that's 500 feet underwater? Okay, if it's down there and it's going 3 knots, which is not atypical. When a submarine's on station, it wants to go very slow because it doesn't want to put any noise in the water. So it's going to go slow enough to be able to make speed and control itself. It's not going to disrupt its own mechanical stability. It's also going to want to know where it's at all the time, so that if it gets an order to launch something, it knows where it is and where to send things to. So they do send a little probe up to the surface that'll grab a location and then bring it right back down again. So they don't even need, they may go up to 200 feet or 100 feet, but is that something that a satellite can actually see through the water or send a signal through the water? Is there a laser that you can sweep back and forth and go down to 400 feet under the water? I don't know. They may very well have something. They may very well have other things that might possibly be able to determine where that submarine is at. But if you really want to know, put something right next to it. But if you're just out there in the open Pacific Ocean and you don't know, even know where to start, you know, that's a problem. Now, there are a lot of hydrophones on the ocean floor. They've been around there since the 60s and they've been updated over time. And they listen. They'll listen over the entire Pacific, over the entire Atlantic. And they'll say, yeah, there's something up there by Iceland. And they know roughly where it is because two or three of them will point. You know roughly where it's at, maybe within 20 square miles, maybe less. I don't know, but you don't know exactly. So you send somebody up there, me for instance. Okay, here's the big area. Go find him. So we go find him. Now we know exactly where he is within a couple decimal points of a lat long. We track him. We know his course, his speed, his depth. We know as much as we can about him, and then we just that's what we do for a living. We
How did you guys tell the difference between a submarine and a big whale? Especially back in the day.
Okay, whales make noise that comes out as broadband, in other words, just "Moo, moo." Okay, but you're looking at machinery on a submarine. And, you got a motor that's going. You got some other piece of equipment.
So it's consistency.
It's the thing that emits the sound. If it's a mechanical sound, it's different than a natural sound that comes from shrimp or whales or porpoises or some other kind of aquatic. If you're near an oil rig, you're going to get a lot of oil rig sounds. If you're near a merchant ship, you're going to get a lot of the sounds of the propellers thrashing through the water. You're going to get, but when we're looking at submarines, we're listening to their turbines. We're listening to other auxiliary motors that are common that we know that particular frequency is this particular piece of equipment on that boat. And so we know what to look for because it's loud and we can pick it up.
That makes a lot of sense. What was the most complex mission you participated as a flight officer, and how did you and your team approached it?
The It was an interesting one because they have a term called ready alert. In other words, you have an aircraft, you pre-flight it, it's ready to go. You are on call depending where you're at, maybe 30 minutes to be in the aircraft and be in the air. Most of the time it's an hour. And we were in the Philippines and we got this little launch. Okay, launch. So we are taking off in the middle of the night. And the mission we had was that this Jolly Green helicopter had crash landed in the South China Sea. And everybody was evacuated, everything was fine. But when they left, it was just,
What's a Jolly Green helicopter?
it's a huge, huge, huge helicopter, one of the biggest ones we have. They call it a Jolly Green. I think it's an H-53, but it's got like five big, huge props on top. It's probably one of the biggest helicopters you'll ever see. And so as they're leaving the area they're rescuing everybody, they notice that the helicopter is still just sitting there right almost on the surface, just right below the surface. So they get back and they said, I left some top secret, super top secret stuff on board. You know, can we find whether that helicopter went all the way to the bottom or not? Okay. So we get launched. It's the middle of the night. There's thunderstorms all over the place. We're running radar and we're out in the South China Sea going in on the location that last helicopter was seen. And almost like a miracle, we got all sorts of radar stuff we're looking at, but there's one ping you can see very clearly. And so we home in on that one. We get down low. By now it's daylight, and we're driving in, and we see one part of the tail rudder sticking above the water, and there's the entire helicopter sitting, 5 feet underwater, perfectly preserved. So we report back in the let's see Guam. They have an Apollo flotation collar they're loading that. They had that loaded, ready to go in case they did find it. So if they load that up, the C-130 takes off. We're there on station, and we're just cruising around, maintaining control. And they're en route, and we get constant updates. Okay, 30 minutes out, 15 minutes out, 10 minutes out. And they're going to skydive down with the Apollo flotation collar, put it underneath and then go in and get the stuff they need. In the meantime, a Navy ship shows up, and they park off over to the side, and they send out a little bitty vessel, maybe two or three people in it, and they drive around this thing. And then, for whatever reason, some stupid reason, the Apollo flotation people are just about ready to dive. We're less than 5 minutes, and they're jumping out of the aircraft. the little boat decides to lasso the thing. There's no way in the world that boat would stay anywhere, but they lassoed it. I'm sitting there. I have a camera. I'm going click, 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 click as we're going by. And at this point in time, the helicopter's going blub, 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 down to about 8,000 feet of water. Uh, we halt the drop of the Apollo flotation. Uh, we, you know, we can't do anything about the little boat that's down there. He kind of wanders back to his mothership. But I think that was probably one of the, I mean, that was as complex as when we found somebody that had been in the water about 12 hours and we dropped a life vest to them or a life raft. And then we vectored a boat out and vectored a helicopter out to pick them up. So I've had a few kind of things like that where you have to coordinate with a lot of other people, or you're the on-scene commander and you have to make decisions what's going on. But complexity is, what's complex to me is nothing. What they sound, well, how the hell do you ever do that? So, but I find that one to be one of the more interesting ones.
Okay. Um, can you discuss a memorable or challenging experience you had in the military?
Yes, working with the South Koreans, we would go up there for exercises, and the Korean officers uh, have the cultural aspect. They prefer to talk to officers. They will give orders to enlisted, but they generally don't have that interplay back and forth. And so, as part of my wild dream at that time, I had 11 units reporting to me, two Coast Guard and 9 Navy Reserve units, all doing mobile inshore undersea war. Not they were doing inshore they were doing inshore. No, they're doing port security, harbor defense. I had an inshore undersea warfare unit. Anyway, I decided to bring some translators. So I contact the Naval Language School in Monterey. I said I need half a dozen uh, speakers of Hangul that I want to bring on my deal. So I bring them out there. They're in uniform, and I put them there, and the Korean officers won't talk to them because they're enlisted. Um, but they learned a lot because they had a chance to interface with everything else. So next year, same thing's coming up, and I tell them absolutely no way in the world where you wear a uniform. Leave them at home. Come in civilian clothes. You're consultants. So they show up the next year. They're consultants. It worked perfectly. Absolutely worked fine. So from you know a bad case to a good case, that was one. I had a similar case over in Bahrain where the Bahraini officers wouldn't talk to the women officers. Well, I happened to have a Navy captain, female, in charge of the event over there. We were there for 4 weeks, and they wouldn't talk to her. So I made the XO, who was a Navy captain, male, the titular head. He would go to all the meetings. He would come back to her. She would make all the decisions. He would take the answers back to them. So the cultures are different, and if you're not working
What's
with
the reason they wouldn't talk to them?
what's that?
What's the reason they wouldn't talk to them?
It's just a cultural thing. And just because they're in the military doesn't mean that they're not like the rest of the culture. They will do what they have to do, but left to themselves, if she shows up in the middle and there's 25 other men there, and half of them are U.S. Navy and half of them are Bahraini Navy, the Bahraini Navies aren't going to talk. That's just part of their culture because they don't recognize as her being an equal or her even being in charge of that particular group of people. So, but yeah, those are kinds of things when you start working with other cultures that you have to understand. I could talk to a Korean naval officer and he would understand what I was saying, but if I wrote it out on a piece of paper and he read it, he understood what I was saying. So there's a different level of understanding. I hear what you're saying versus I understand what you're saying. So depending what I needed to get across to somebody, I would write it out in English and they could translate it in their mind because they could read English, they hear English, but it didn't translate as easily. So if I had something that was really important, I would take the time and handwrite it out so that they could they would give me a thumbs up because I would tell them that, and yeah, they know, but they don't know, and so it's understanding what are those other cultures. Uh, I got a real funny story for you. We were working with the Chinese nationalist destroyer, where we were flying on top of the the vessel, the destroyer, at about 200 feet, and they would give us directions to fly outbound, like 090 degrees, because they were testing their ability to hone their sonar in on a U.S. submarine that was sitting out there. So they would use us, and then we would fly out that bearing line. And if the submarine was there, one of our sensors was called magnetic anomaly sensor. It would pick up any disturbance of the magnetic field. So we fly out there, we got a little, swing in the magnetic field, and we say, yes, we got him. Okay, so the day we took off to work with this particular boat, our magnetic anomaly, it has gyro stabilization, but for whatever reason, one of them fell flat. I could make right hand turns, but I couldn't make a left hand turn. If I made a left hand turn, everything jumbled up, and it took about 5 minutes to get everything balanced again. So we're out there, and we tell the Chinese watch officers on duty, only give right hand turns. We cannot make a left hand turn. So we mark on top of the boat. We're going outbound 090. It says, come left 2 degrees. It's like, nope, can't do that. Um, and so we go around again. And about three times, okay, fine, come right, come right, come right. No, come left. So they finally understood that. About 4 hours later, they put a new shift on there. We had to go through the whole thing again. Another 4 hours, they put another shift on there. We go through the same thing. We're out there about 12 hours. And they finally get that down. I didn't think anything of it. About 2 weeks later, I'm at a local bar on base in Tainan, Taiwan, and I'm listening to this guy. The new crew just came in, and they're talking back and forth up there. I'm playing pool, and one of the guys says, "Yeah, we just had the craziest thing." He says, "We get on station, and this Chinese destroyer. First question they ask is, can our airplane turn left?" And they had no idea how that question got there. I had to go explain to him. But he said, "Yeah, hang on a second. Yeah, our airplane can turn left." So again, things happen, and you don't understand why some cultures ask questions. That was one that's perfectly legitimate. Can your airplane turn left? Every airplane can turn left, but it wasn't the turning left; it was the disruption of the.
Do you think they still have those problems today?
I think anytime you have a culture and language difference, you can have problems because what you hear is not necessarily what you understand. We have that probably even here in your own studio.
That's very true. How do you think the military's approach to teamwork and communication can inform the or improve other industries and organizations?
In the military, you're a captive audience. You don't have a choice. You do what they say. When you join the Marines, they don't care where you've been from. They're going to break you down and then build you up the way they want. They want your mind, your body, your soul, everything operating. When they say go do that, you go do that. You don't question it. That's the teamwork. That's what's expected. You get the same thing in the very elite forces, the SEALs and the Green Berets and all that. There are certain expectations. But when you get in just the regular military, you have a hierarchy. Again, you're a captive audience. You report to this ship, this boat, this base, this aircraft, whatever it may happen to be. You're there. You have a job to do. You do it, and if you do it well, you get advanced and advanced and advanced, promoted. So if you look at civilian life, you're not a captive audience. You can leave anytime you want. Do you have the same level of training? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you might have it coming in. Maybe you're going there to get that training. In the military, if you're a radio operator, by the time you go from this rank to that rate to this to this to this, you have ungodly amount of hours operating all these different pieces of equipment. You have that experience. Well, if I'm doing that same kind of job, whatever that is, now I may not have branding experts in the military, I may not have social media marketers in the military, but if I'm looking for somebody to do my logistics work, if I'm looking for somebody to do my other aspects of business in general, yes, you have somebody that already has the requisite experience and or leadership, depending on what you're looking for, that a non-military person may acquire, may be very good at, but if they're not good at giving directions to other people, they have a lot of innate knowledge. But in the military, as you advance, you also pick up that leadership role for those underneath you. So you have that developing along with it. So you have in the military an increasing level of awareness, increasing level of education, increasing level of credibility and authority, and the ability to continue on, know what needs to be done, and direct downward what needs to happen. I think there's probably some industries that they cultivate that because they want their person to be a better programmer or to be a better whatever that particular niche is in that field. Now you may argue the fact, well, I need a painter, and here's a labor union or an electrician or whatever, and they have 20 years of electrical experience. Um, but do they have the same kinds of stuff? I think there's probably some industries in the civilian world that that do approach that and probably have some level equivalent. But I think in generalities, I think that you're getting a lot more for your dollar when you hire somebody who has 10, 12, 15 years in the military. Yeah. I interviewed a company to be a quality assurance manager, and one of the comments that was made back to me was the fact that I see you moved around a lot during your career. And I said, yes, you have layoffs, you have all sorts of things. Well, the people in that particular company had started from the beginning. It was family. Everybody had been there 30 years. I said, but what you get from me is the fact that I've been through depressions, recessions. I've been through different changes in technology. I've been through a lot of different things. That's what you're buying when somebody comes in with a lot of different changes. Not somebody who changes every 6 months, but somebody who changes every 3 or 4 years, either on purpose or not on purpose. There are things that you can, and that's what I look at when I interview people. I want to know, what did they learn when they left one job to the next.
That's great advice. What do you believe is the most important quality for a successful flight officer, and how did you cultivate in yourself?
Now, in the old days, I would say patience. In the new days, I'd say patience, because you have so much information. Yet in the old day, you didn't have a whole lot of information. You had to wait, and sometimes you waited out there 10 hours, and you come home with just a bunch of information. Okay, now you come home and you made 15 simulated attacks on the submarine that's out there. You come home, but sometimes you get too much information, and maybe one bit of that information isn't right. And if you had just waited a little bit longer, maybe you would have seen the whole picture. Sometimes we get too antsy to do things. And this is whether it's military or not. I think this applies to all of us. Sometimes we jump on something that looks too good because it looks too good. Well, I think you have to have that ability to recognize, is it too good, or is this fooling me at the moment? And so I think patience to a point, not hours worth of it just because you have to have 100%. But I think, if you have 95% confidence in what you're looking at, and it's enough information to make a good decision, then that's an appropriate time. Don't wait for that 100% because you'll never get it. So I think patience is probably one, and you only get that by making mistakes and then learning from your mistakes. In every exercise we've been in, the last thing they do is lessons learned, and they'll write a book for a big book full. And so every exercise you go on, here's 6 years ago, 5 years, you look at all the old lessons learned, and you go on there and you thumb through them. Okay, 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 and so you can learn from other people's mistakes. And that's one major benefit that the military does have, is they have all these lessons learned from different kinds of exercises they've been at. So you have an exercise here that you're using this, and okay, well, that exercise over there is very similar. Let's go look at their books. So patience to me, I mean, there's a multitude of them, but if I had to pick one, patience.
Can you discuss a leadership lesson you learned during the time as a flight officer, and how have you applied in your other roles and experience?
I'm trying to find where I can turn up my volume. Here we go. Could you repeat that one more time?
Sure. Can you discuss a leadership lesson you learned during your time as a flight officer, and how have you applied it in your other roles and experiences?
Um, well, let me report on myself. Um, in a flight crew situation, we're very friendly with everyone. I happened to have one flight crew that I was the skipper of the squadron, the commanding officer of the squadron was in our particular crew, and we're sitting around there talking, and we're using everyone's first names, and I'm calling the skipper by his first name, which is, you don't do that. But I was young and impressionable. It was one of those things that I felt comfortable doing it until after we got done, and he pulled me aside and he says, Red, um, that's not appropriate. He says, I'm a skipper. He says, if we're one on one, yeah, call me whatever, no problem with that. But if we're a bunch of other people around, give me the respect of the office that I hold. And I said, absolutely, absolutely, no problem. And so I noticed when I started working with other admirals and generals down the road, occasionally one would tell me, okay, Red, you know, if we're not around anybody, call me Frank, George, Glenn, whatever it may happen to be. But at that point in time, I always, until they retired, and were out of the military and a civilian, I would always call them by general or admiral for the respect of their rank, because that's what they attained. Um, and so the lesson that I learned was, don't assume that just because you know somebody that's in a high authority that you automatically have their blessing to call to be very informal with them in an open session. So whether it's Mr. Mayor, like my dad was mayor of a city for, and people called him Mr. Mayor for 20 years after he was out of that. But whether it's Madam Secretary, Mr. President, whatever that is, give your boss, give that rank, that position, the authority. Just like, doctors call the doctors call the doctor. If the doctors, call me George. Well, I still call him doctor for a bunch of people, because now that lesson I learned a long time ago is give respect to the person who's earned it. By now, sometimes,
I think that's a great advice, especially for younger generation,
yeah, sometimes I didn't think they had
especially
earned
these
it,
days.
but I still gave it to them. Yeah, it's just, you can't go wrong.
Right. So how did you transition from being in military 31 years to health and wellness? How did that happen?
Ah, great question. I love that one. As I mentioned earlier, my first love was chemistry. 15 years old, sophomore in high school, fell in love with it, got a degree in it, ready to go out and be a chemist, and got an invitation to Vietnam. 4.5 years later, I get out of the military, join the reserves, and I can't become a chemist because I didn't get my master's, a lot of other things. I end up in statistics and quality assurance and reliability engineering. I end up in a different field. I train for that. I get degrees and I get professional certifications. I do everything. Anyway, jump way down the line. About 8 years ago, my wife came down with breast cancer. I, at that point in time, had been retired from Halliburton, and I was writing books and speaking on self improvement, motivation. And at this point in time, my wife was having some really serious side effects from the chemo drugs. So I'm thinking to myself, let me just kind of do some research and see if I can find what can I do to help. And so I tackle one, okay, tackle another, and I managed to tackle just about everything except for fatigue. I could look at, what's going on, what's this chemical doing, and kind of try to analyze it as best I can. Okay, let's make this change. But fatigue I could not do. Didn't matter. And in between chemotherapy months and beginning of weeks of radiation therapy, I had read a book called uh, the Walls Protocol, WAHLS. Dr. Terry Walls is a physician. Late in life, she came down with MS. She studied autoimmune diseases. She wrote a book. She was in a wheelchair for years. She put herself on her own protocol. Within 3 months, she got out of a wheelchair, was walking using a walker. A month later, she's walking using a cane. By the end of the year, she could bicycle 18 miles. And I'm telling my wife, Marilyn, I says, let's just try it. It can't hurt anything. So, day one of radiation, and our radiologist told us her fatigue would probably get worse. We started the Walls Protocol, dietary portion only. There's 4 different protocols. We only started the diet, and it's basically focused. It focuses on 30 plus nutrients the body needs on a daily basis. You get all those nutrients, and your body should respond exceptionally well. 48 hours into radiation, she wasn't taking any more naps. A week later, she volunteered at the church. The last day of radiation, we got in the car and drove 1,000 miles to Jacksonville, Florida. I rented a U-Haul. She followed me by herself 500 miles each day on the way back, 48 hours after her last radiation treatment. That that definition of nutrition, being able to wipe out months of chemo fog, weeks of radiation therapy, and make my wife whole again, and a year later we're able to walk 500 miles across Spain, convinced me that nutrition was a better study than motivation. And so I had a degree in chemistry. Why not take advantage of it? So I started at that point in time. Well, how do things work? Let's just go on from a natural progression. What causes you to age? Well, we know it's human growth hormone. We know it's the length of your telomere. What causes disease? Chronic low level inflammation. Well, what causes that chronic low level inflammation? Okay, what causes that? So, what causes Alzheimer's? Well, if that causes, what caused that to happen? What caused that other thing to happen first? And so that's kind of where my research goes to. That's what I research almost every single day. That's what I write about. That's what I speak about. And that's my passion nowadays, is to figure these things out and pass it on to the rest of the world.
What's your opinion on the use of chemical treatment in medicine? and their potential side effects?
Well, you have to take a look at our entire medical association. They have strict guidelines on what they can do. If they don't, they're subject to legal actions in court. So if it says, here's cancer, this is the appropriate chemo regimen for that particular stage of cancer, and because all these other things have been done historically, they can't go wrong. That's what they do. If the patient dies, they've done everything they can do right. If the patient says, I'm not going to do it, and the patient dies, they've done everything they can do. They're legally covered, they're morally covered, they don't have any problem. But that's the way our health system works. We put band aids on things. We do not go to the cause and say, what caused that cancer? I have no idea in the world. Well, if you had to speculate what caused that, I don't know. We're not trained that way. So when you start looking at what can cause a cancer, well, there's probably at least six things that I know of. You know, you're looking at inflammation, you're looking at oxidative stress, you're looking at radiation, uh, toxins, you're looking at stress. Stress is a big one. I think stress is probably 70% of all doctors' visits. It has some genesis in stress. Okay, let's say that when I sat down with my wife and we're trying to figure out what caused her breast cancer. Well, not that one, maybe that one, maybe that one, and maybe that one, not that one. So we kind of looked at the major causes of disease, saying that if they advanced over 30 years undetected, yeah, you could have a tumor because when she first had the breast cancer, she could feel it, and 10 minutes later she couldn't. You know, same thing with me. Okay, and then 5 minutes later you couldn't feel it. So for about a year it was there and disappeared. And we were doing a lot of stuff to prevent it, but then all of a sudden it became very okay. I can feel it. I can feel it. I can feel it. Let's go to the doctors. And so she ended up getting a lumpectomy, removed, and she recovered 100%. But the our protocols say if this happens, you do this, and the doctor's protected. But if you're a naturalist and you say, well, I want you to do this meditation, I want you to do some Tai Chi, I want you to do this nutritional supplement of green juice or whatever, different approach. But if you're going after the cause of the problem, maybe the cause is stress and you're treating the stress, but how do you know it's stress? So that's part of the deal. How do we know what the cause is? So maybe I treat three different causes at the same time and try to wipe those out. And yeah, inflammation and oxidation are two easy ones to wipe out. Radiation's an easy one to wipe out. You don't keep this thing back to your ear all day long. You stay back away from your monitors and your TV sets. And but then again, as soon as I have a light on in this room, I get electromagnetic force going all over me because of the electrons running through all of the wires and everything around me. I turn it off, everything stops. So, if I'm looking at toxins, if I'm not reading labels on everything that I'm doing, I don't know what I'm putting in my body. So, reading labels is a major one. So, there's a lot of things that we can do to minimize our risk of disease, but the doctors aren't trained that way. There are some functional medicine doctors who want to know, let's talk about your history. What's your diet? What's your exercise program? What do you do for stress? All those kinds of things, but that's not the norm. But the norm is let's put a band aid on it, fix the symptom, and then you can enjoy your life.
Hmm. Do you believe that longevity should be a primary focus in modern medicine, or should we focus more on improving quality of life for people of all ages?
Okay, let me ask you a question. Would you rather live to 90 years of age with reasonable expectation to do what you want, or do you want to live to 100 years of age with somebody changing your diaper for the last 10 years? You know, my dad used to think,
I would
yeah, my dad used
I
to
would
think
want to
dying
live
was the worst case scenario.
until
Until
100
100,
somebody
somebody
changes my
changes
diaper.
my diaper.
Yeah, yeah, we all want to have a good long life, but we don't want to have bad health at the end of our life. So, to answer your question specifically, quality of life I think is more important because if somebody's changing your diaper for even 2 years, that's a major inconvenience for you and for them and everyone else around you. But if you can, jump in the car and you're 97 years of age and you run up and you buy what you want with or without a GPS, uh, then you have the ability to live your life better than most of the people around you. Uh, there used to be a DJ here in town. He had two sayings that I loved. One of them he used every single day. He says, "Don't let anybody steal your joy," and that is so true. But the other one he used about 3 times a week, and that was he says, "One mother can take care of 10 kids, but 10 kids cannot take care of one mother." and you take a look at the way things are nowadays, it's rare when a son or daughter or family takes care of a grandparent, especially if they have Alzheimer's, especially if they're in a wheelchair and have other issues. They'll farm them off to an old folks home or an assisted living or whatever else. And so you look at what has our society changed from? It used to be, here's the parents, the grandparents, the grandkids all living kind of together or next door or within your distance. And we took care of each other. But nowadays, that you may have three kids living in the same city, but none of them are taking care of grandma, who's 82 years of age in a walker or wheelchair or whatever. It just we're not seeing that same kind of responsibility.
Was that happening 50 years ago? Was it fairly a new thing that uh, this like the I call it old folks houses? Like they're everywhere. Like where I come from, we don't have those things because we take care of our elderly. This is a new concept for me. Like how when did that change?
I don't know when the old folks' homes started really proliferating, but assisted living started coming out of our system. I'm going to say post 60s. But if you get back into the 50s and earlier, that was the norm because that's the way things were. There wasn't a home, maybe there was a home for unwed women, teens or whatever. Maybe there was a home for uh, something else, but they were far and few between, and most people didn't know about it or couldn't afford them. So economics, availability, uh, those things. Now you have Medicare that pays part of it. You have your life insurance uh, plans that will pay part of it. You have whatever it may happen to be. There's something there that will come cover part of those. Now maybe you have an old, let's say, over 55 community. Okay, they're all self-sufficient, but maybe off to the side of that you have, well, here's an old folks home, but part of that old folks home is an Alzheimer's ward, and maybe part of this other one over here is really for us, when you really need assistance daily with your drugs, those kinds. And so we've kind of specialized and developed the infrastructure to handle those things that we don't handle. I remember when my brother-in-law was in hospice in San Antonio, we drove up to this place. It's in the middle of a residential area, wonderful home. This can't be a hospice place. And we walk in the door. It's a one-story place. And it's got 5 bedrooms downstairs. They've all been revamped, extra wide doors, and all the stuff inside. And basically, and they have a patio out in the back where you can park in the driveway. You can, they'll wheel the patient back to the back. You can sit out there. I mean, some of the best quality of life in your last 2 or 3 days for the family and for the patient. And I'm thinking, yeah, I would love to open a couple, 3 or 4 of these kind of places because that really does have a nice fitting end as opposed to let's go up the third floor and get to the off. Okay, room 302, whatever, and you go down and you see somebody there in a bed that just that's not quite the same thing that you expect when you're getting ready to check out. So I think that we meet the demand when the demand is there. So supply and demand, that demand is there. Let's meet it. And if I can meet it and I can keep somebody on there 24/7, and I got Medicare coming in, paying the bills, okay, I can make this work. So that's what I think.
Great. What do you believe the role of chemical research in addressing climate change?
Well, I hate to disappoint you, but I'm not a climate change believer. Um, I I haven't seen anything at all, and I've looked at it very seriously from a researcher's perspective. I don't see anything there. If you go back into the 1400s and you look at some of the treks that were made north of Siberia, where there was no ice, you know, volcanoes put stuff into the air. The air warms up, it cools back down again. You have the underwater uh, volcanoes in the Pacific. 40 years, 50 years ago, the Pacific Ocean was cooler than it is today by a degree or two. Okay, what's it called? What put the heat in the water? It wasn't the air putting the heat into the water because it only go down a couple inches. So you have to have something below the ocean, volcanoes, putting the heat into it. What caused the volcano? Well, it wasn't some climate change on Earth that caused the volcano to go up. So, to me, from a researcher's perspective, it's not something I believe in. So if I can't answer the question of the climate change, I can't answer the other part of it.
Okay. Why are we talking about climate change? That it's changing. Like, what's the? Is it like a political reasons? Is that what it is?
No, I think that there's probably you. How big is the sun? How far? I mean, look at all of the external things that are going on in our world. Things cycle; they really do. What was cycling back in uh, okay, Houston, Texas. Why would we have 24-hour snowfall? The record snowfall for Houston, Texas is 22 inches. You would think that's a mini ice age. Well, that was February of 1895. Have we ever had 22 inches of snow since then? No. Have we had 5 or 6 inches? Probably. But we have extremes that occur all the time. But sometimes over time, let's say the Sahara Desert used to be not so much a desert, but maybe more green. And over time, climatic weather changes occur because of volcanoes, because of earthquakes, because of a number of different things. And you have a gradual shift in, okay, this part of the earth is not radiating as much as this part of the earth. Or maybe we have more snowfall one year than the next. And I think you have differences in uh, the evolution. You have one of the things that I really look at a lot is the Madden Julian oscillation, MJO. It is where's the MGO? If it's in phase three this time of the year, I expect Texas to be warmer than colder. If I'm looking at different oscillations in the Pacific or the Atlantic or the Indian Ocean, I'm looking at there's 4 or 5 or 6 things. You got the El Nino and La Nina. Uh, what is there now? I spend a lot of time, literally every week. I look at what's going on in the world as far as worldwide temperatures go, across the equator, across the poles. That's just another passion of mine besides chemistry. When I'm flying, we have to have our meteorological reports. We have to know what's going on. I'm flying through weather all the time. I want to know more about it. So it's kind of a subset of my chemistry. I love learning about weather. So when I look at the MGO and I look at the North Atlantic oscillation, I'm looking at the Eastern Pacific oscillation, I'm looking at those things. Well, is this positive? Is that negative? Okay, what do these three say together? Well, 1955 and 1971 and 1982, these conditions were exactly the same, and the temperature in March was 45 degrees in this area. Okay, well, maybe it's probably going to be the same because all those other conditions are exactly the same they are today. But what if the Pacific Ocean is warmer? Well, all bets are off because that's a big sump of heat. And whether it's 1 degree or 2 degrees up or down, that's still a lot of heat. And you have to do something with it. So it's how much water vapor gets into the air, how much of it. There's not a single variable you can say, well, let's just measure the carbon dioxide and we'll make a decision. There are so many variables out there that it's really, really hard to come up with an equation that's going to balance them. But you can look at 3 or 4 or 5 equations and say, well, that has it, that trends this direction. And that's, to me, the best we can hope for.
Hmm, interesting. Um, do you think it's a good idea to replace all the cars with electric cars?
Well, technology improves all the time. We went from horse and buggy to vehicles. We went from not flying to jets to men on the moon. Technology is inevitable. Yes, I think we're probably going to see a lot of electric cars down the road, but it's like anything else. Do you have the infrastructure right now to support, another 2 million cars on the road next year? No. Um, so until you have the infrastructure there, build it and they will come. So build the infrastructure, and the electric cars are going to improve. You're going to get 1,000 miles out of a battery instead of 300. You won't need as many across the country because that technology will happen not only in the battery end of things, but also in the other aspects. Uh, if you can get
But you don't think that will have any effect on climate change at all?
me personally, because I don't believe in climate change. I believe in weather. I believe in climate, but I don't think man controls the climate. I really don't.
Okay.
That's my personal belief.
Uh, right. And I respect that. Are there any ethical considerations that should be taken into an account when conducting chemical research on the human body?
Well, that's why a lot of the research is done on animals. Yeah, to answer your question, yes or no, yes. Um, a lot of the stuff is done, maybe it's at a worm level, maybe it's, a little bit larger level than that. Then maybe you get into the rats, into mice, into squirrels, into dogs, into whatever, because pigs have a very similar cardiovascular system to ours, and so you start looking, is this thing rejecting because of that, and you do the autopsy or the necroscopies on the animals, trying to find out, well, what caused that animal to die? Was it the intervention that we did, or was it something else? Or maybe because we did that, it caused something else to fail. I think we see a lot of that. We're not going to be like the Nazis during World War II and just start testing humans. I think that's absolutely wrong. But I think that we're going to get to a point where we say, we think this is safe. And that's when they start coming out with the clinical trials. Okay, we're going to run this clinical trial for 5 years, and we're going to see what happens. Then we'll maybe monitor for another 5 years. Well, that's a long period of time before you can come out with a new drug, and it's very expensive. Uh, Now, we did something like that with our vaccines. We said, okay, let's test them for about 10 months, boom, and they're out. But there was an immediate need to kind of address the hospitalization overcrowding. Okay, we addressed that, but we didn't do things that I think we should have. I think we're starting to see a lot of the ramifications of that, not continuing the test. Or had we continued the test, then we knew we were going to have to come out with boosters every so many months. We have probably about 130 vaccines right now being worked in clinical trials around the world. I am sure that at least two or three or four of them are going to be very successful against that particular coronavirus. But they're going to be doing tests for 5 years minimum to make sure that you can address the mutations in it. So, yes, chemical tests, prescription tests, biological, whatever, are going to eventually be done on humans, but it's going to be done when they feel that it's 99% safe to do. That whatever is there, are they going to be doing it on pregnant women? No. Are they going to be doing it on kids? No. They're going to be doing it on healthy. And then they said, well, let's take a subset. Well, maybe we want to look at obese with diabetes. That's not a typical, but it's getting to be more typical in the states. So I think that they're going to gradually expand those tests into some of the other areas and say, if you're pregnant or think about becoming pregnant, if you're obese, if you what, don't do this because we don't know the ramifications, we don't know the side effects. Or if they know the side effects, then they're going to tell you everything up. Oh, it's going to cause you to die. It's going to cause your hair to fall out. It's going to cause your left arm to wither away. They're going to tell you everything. In fact, I think the only other country in the world besides the United States that can advertise prescription medicine is New Zealand. Nowhere else in the world do we do that. And why? Because the people that are trying to tell you this particular drug are only, it's not the whole world. The whole world doesn't care about that drug. It only cares about the people who have that drug, that person will see it and go to their doctor and say, I want to try that. And that's they're focusing in on. There's not a supply and demand. It's a very narrow demand, and they're trying to get their drug out in front of that so they can be out in the public. That's again opinion. I'm just looking at why would they tell me something that nobody has, nobody even knows about. We've never heard of this, unless they're only pandering to a particular market so that they can get that drug, into the public space. I don't know. Maybe there's a better.
Great. What's your stance on the use of chemical enhancers and performance enhancing drugs in sports?
Well, we like to think that we are fair and even in everything we do. Who was a big case here? The bicyclist that was doping. Can't think of his name right this second. But when you have an unfair advantage, everybody else is playing on a level field. And this person over here is taking something that's performance enhancing, and this person isn't. And this person can now run faster, lift more weight, be quicker, whatever the sport is, more accurate. Is that fair? You know, Now, if you say, well, you can both have them, well, maybe this person's going to do that one and something else. I don't know. If you're going to have a fair, equitable way of judging who is the best in any particular event from a sports perspective, keep it keep it honest, keep it fair. Uh, if you can give this football team, some extra steroids and some extra this and that, and they're a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, a little bit faster, and every single time they get up the line, they're going to run right over you. You know, is that really indicator of, hey, these are the best people that we have out there? Only when they're on drugs are they the best. So no, I don't think it's a thing we should be doing.
What do you think about transgender women competing in women's sport?
Absolutely against it. You know, Do you have DNA? You're either a male or female. Uh, I would ask you a simple question. If you believe in God, did God make a mistake? You know, if God made a mistake, then maybe there's transgender things that can happen out there. But because our society is honing in on a of half of 1% of something to make a political statement or to do whatever as far as that community goes, I don't believe in it. I honestly don't. You are either one or the other. You may not feel comfortable in that. Again, did God make a mistake? If he did, then he's not God. So whatever problems you have internally, are you going to work those through and have a normal life when you mature? Or are you going to try to solve that problem when you're 7 years of age because your parents want you to feel good? They don't want you to ever be on a losing team. I don't know. I don't think it's right.
I understand. Do you think that the current regulations around chemical substance are adequate, or do they need to be strengthened?
Well, how easy is it to get fentanyl? You know, that's one of the most current ones right now as far as strengthening regulations. You can have all the regulations you want. But if somebody can walk it across the border and then give it to somebody, and 2 days later, it's in Los Angeles, and 30,000 pills that are now being walked around the neighborhood. You can regulate all you want, you can legislate all you want, but you have to have the infrastructure, just like on the electrical vehicles, to stop the flow at the level before it becomes harmful. And we don't have that.
How do you see the relationship between chemistry and technology evolving in the future?
I think everything, whether it's electrical, biological, chemical, mechanical, hydraulic, all of them are going to evolve. Are they going to evolve at the microscopic level, at a chemical or a hydraulic level? Are they going to evolve at uh, a let's say, an ability to perform in space with temperatures that are plus, 300, 400 degrees centigrade and minus 100 centigrade? You know, you have to have that technology. It's going to work in the little, in the normal environment that we're in, and in the extra demanding environment of space. So yes, you're going to see changes in technology, and whether it be in the chemical field, because they can make this particular chemical in the perfect vacuum of space and then bring it back to Earth, and it's going to perform differently, uh, or they're going to make this particular microbe better because, well, when you make a chemical in the lab, you're usually getting a left hand and a right hand version because it's 50-50 how those things bounce against each other. So if it bounces and forms a left hand, bounces and forms a right hand. But in nature, they have a tendency to only make right hand ones. So when you're taking like a vitamin C, that ascorbic acid is primarily maybe a right handed version of that particular molecule. But in the lab, you're getting left handed and right handed 50-50. So I take the pill, it's not quite the same. But maybe there's a chemical process that can drive most of my stuff to the right, and it's not that expensive. So maybe the technology to make right hand ascorbic acid becomes viable in the future, and I can start making some of these things even better down the road. So yes, I think there's every potential to make the chemical world technologically better.
What do you believe is the most effective approach for preventing related diseases and why?
Okay, two or three quick answers to that. Number one, balanced nutrition. If you're deficient in anything, you're going to have a problem. Vitamin B12 deficiency mimics Alzheimer's. Vitamin B1, B3 deficiency usually end up with anxiety and depression. So you need balanced nutrition. Animal studies show that if you're on caloric restriction, about 30% less calories than what you would normally need, according to nutritionists. You take a look at a dog, and you have two dogs. You keep one dog on a normal regimen of food. You put the other dog on a 15, 30, 25% less food. The dog with the less food is going to live longer, look younger, and have no age related diseases compared to the other one. And we're seeing the same thing. If you cut back your calories, not your carbs, you cut back your calories about 30%, people tend to have less age related diseases. What else goes into the disease? Well, it's not just food, there's other things there too. One of the advices I give to people: switch your regular plate out to a salad plate. Go for one session only. Do not go back for seconds. You're now cutting out a lot of food because you can't pile it on that plate. So that's caloric restriction. Make sure what's there is balanced. That takes care of that. But you also need other things on top of that. You need some level of daily stress relief. You need some level of exercise. If I'm looking at what are the two things that cause uh, the aging parameters in the body, the causes of aging, one being human growth hormone. Well, human growth hormone increases a lot if you do high intensity interval training. How many of us do that? Not many. So, what else causes human growth hormone to grow? Fasting. When you're a kid, you have a lot of it. You're a teenager, you start losing a little bit of it. You get in your 20s, you're losing. 40s, you're losing more. 60s, you're losing a whole lot. Now you're in your 70s or 80s, and you're almost out. Well, you go fasting, all of a sudden now you're back up to where levels you were as a teenager. So you keep your levels up high, and that human growth hormone remains in charge of everything. It's human growth hormone. It's the thing that kept everything in balance. So from that perspective, fasting has to be improved, implemented along with whatever longevity program you have. The other one is the telomere length. When the cell replicates, you lose a little bit of the telomere at the bottom of your DNA. And when that happens, what causes more of that? Well, if you're a smoker, you're overweight, you're cardiovascular, you had diabetes. Instead of losing a little bit, now you're losing a lot. And so you need to look at what are your lifestyle choices. Stress is part of that. Toxins are part of that. And so you look at those kinds of things and what can you correct? Well, things that do correct it is a liberal amount of exercise, nothing intense, uh, nutritional balance. So if you're looking at the things that cause longevity and you fix those or you address those on a regular basis, you're probably going to get there. Now, if you look at the things that cause disease and you start addressing stress and toxins and radiation, inflammation, uh, infection, diet, exercise, expectation, even expectations cause disease, believe it or not. Those are the things that you can do yourself and give you a better odds at not having someone change your diaper when you're 89 years of age.
Great. What do you think the biggest challenges facing the longevity research community today, and how can we address them?
Well, if you took 10 of your best friends out to eat and they told them, eat anything you want, you'll take them anywhere. They're going to eat all sorts of different things. And those same 10 people, if you ask them, tell me about your exercise program, it may or may not exist in all of them. Well, tell me what you do every day for stress relief. Um, Half of them, what's stress relief? Uh, every human is a little bit different. And until you can have some kind of test, clinical trials on the things that we know work, you don't know. But what the FDA does not test is food. So we'll never ever be able to find out about food because that's not one of the things they test about. And what makes us grow older, healthier, is our food, our lifestyle, the foods we choose, the exercise we do, our stress relief, our toxin management, all those kinds of things. So the things that make us grow older are very difficult to test in a lab because everybody is so different. Now, if you took out 10 people and they all had hot dogs and everybody was happy and they all had, the same thing, they do breathing exercises, 3 times a day, then I say, hey, yeah, we could probably make this work, but that's not our norm. That's not who we are.